Hey, good afternoon, class. Today, you're going to get your first history minutes with Mr. Flynn, and hopefully there'll be many more videos to follow. But these are things that I would be talking to you about in class throughout the semester, and I didn't want to deprive you of what knowledge I think I have and my charisma of teaching. So today I want to start with something that is near and dear to my heart is the Battle of Vimy Ridge. I went to Vimy Ridge back in 2017, had a chance to visit, and it's considered one of the battles, if not one of the most important battles in Canadian history. It was one of the first significant gains by the Allies in World War One. So it's a very significant battle, not only for Canadian history, but in uniting Canada as a country. The work that went into the battle with General Arthur Currie and his planning team, and the meticulous practicing of this battle, it kind of set the stage for a new way of fighting wars. Excuse me. Before we can really get into talking about the Battle of Vimy Ridge, which took place on April 9th to April 12th, 1917. We really have to go back almost a full year and look at the Battle of the Somme, which took place started on July 1st, 1916. The Battle of the Somme was fought by the British against the Germans at the Somme in France. The Germans held the high ground at the Battle of the Somme, and they could see everything. I mean, everything that the British were doing. The British had no way of disguising it seemed, what was going on. So when the Germans saw the British bringing all their troops to the trenches, the frontline trenches, they knew something was going to happen. And so they prepared themselves very well. The strategies implemented at the Battle of the Somme by the British were, for a modern war, were archaic. They basically the goal at the Battle of the Somme was to wear the Germans down, and the only way they figured they could do this was by sending wave after wave of men at the machine guns, and this was very costly in lives. Imagine sending men running at the machine guns over and over and over again, and then watching them be mowed down and killed, and then thinking, well, that didn't work. What else can we do? Well, let's run at the machine guns again. That's basically what the British were doing. Hey, this is Teddy. She's going to be making some appearances here and there. That's what the British had tried to do. It was the goal of wearing down wasn't to take land. It was more or less to wear the enemy down and make them surrender. It was known as a battle of attrition. So on July 1st, I should backtrack. The week before July 1st, the British started a week-long artillery barrage at the Germans, 24 hours a day. They hoped that it would weaken the Germans, it would soften them up, and basically kill most of the Germans in the frontline trenches before the British even went there or attacked. So the British they felt they would be able to just walk across no man's land, that area between the two enemy trenches. So when the barrage stopped at the morning of July 1st at 7:30 a.m., that's when the British sent their first wave of men over. Okay, Teddy, calm down. So the first thing that the British did was 7:30 a.m. They blow the whistle and the men go over the top. Going over the top means they come out of their trenches and they start going across no man's land. The Germans were in World War One for the long haul. They didn't expect it to be a war of movement. They thought it was going to be a stalemate early on. So they had dug into the Somme very deeply. They had dugouts that were about 40 feet deep into the ground that protected their soldiers from the artillery barrage. So when the British came out of their trenches at 7:30 a.m. on July 1st, the Germans just came out of their dugouts, manned their machine guns, and just proceeded to mow the British down, literally. And the British generals, not knowing of really any other way to attack, sent four waves of men over the top at the Germans that one morning, that first morning of the battle, before they called it off. And in the process, that morning, it marks one of the worst, if not the worst, disaster in British military history. 60,000 men were casualties, 20,000 killed approximately, and approximately 40,000 wounded. Now you think about that. Riverview has a population of about 20,000. That's 3 times the population of Riverview killed or wounded in one morning, just one morning of battle. So when it came time for General Currie and his planning team to plan the Battle of Vimy Ridge, they looked back at the mistakes and the poor planning of the Battle of the Somme to try to make a battle plan that would spare the lives of the Canadian soldiers. They didn't want to just send the Canadians at the Germans wave after wave after wave to die needlessly, senselessly. So when the British, so when the Canadians were asked to attack Vimy Ridge, the British had already tried to take it for 3 months, British and French, and they failed horrendously. They couldn't do it. So they put it on the Canadians to do this. And just like the Somme, the Germans held the high ground at Vimy Ridge. So they could see everything the Canadians were doing. Everything. So the plans, if they were going to be successful and spare lives, they had to be very well organized. And they had to practice this battle plan. And that's what Currie and his generals did. They looked at the... They took the 3 months before the battle and they planned as much as they could, and they practiced. Some of the things that helped the Battle of Vimy Ridge be successful for the Canadians were several innovations in battle planning. First, instead of sending the Canadians out of the trenches at the Germans and being put at the mercy of the German machine guns and artillery cannons, the Canadians decided to pinpoint where the artillery cannons were, where the machine guns were before the battle, and try to take out as many of them as possible before the battle even started. This had never really been done before. Currie even said, why on earth have the artillery of the Allies ever tried, why had they not tried to take out the artillery of the enemy? Was there some kind of camaraderie between them? He didn't know. He didn't care. He said, I'm taking out these things, because most people in World War I, they died from artillery and machine guns. So if you take those out, that gives your men a fighting chance right away. The other thing that was innovative, the Canadians used their machine guns kind of like artillery. Instead of just aiming at targets, they would fire the machine guns at the fronts of the German trenches and try to keep them or over the German trenches, I should say, and try to keep them in their trenches as long as possible. But the thing that really helped the Canadians in this battle for the most was something called a rolling artillery barrage. And what this was, normally when the artillery is firing, the enemy stays in their trenches. That's what happened at the Somme. The Germans just stayed in their 40-foot bunkers and waited out the artillery barrage, and when the artillery stopped, that was usually a sign that the attack was going to take place. So there was very few men in the German trenches during an artillery barrage. So what the Canadians did was they fired their artillery throughout the entire attack, but they kept it about 100 yards or 300 feet in front of the Canadians. And the Canadians would walk at a certain pace, a steady pace, and the artillery barrage would move with them, again, 300 feet ahead, so the Canadians wouldn't be killed. So the artillery barrage is going on, and the Germans are more or less just staying in their trenches, and the Canadians are walking across the field. It's almost like a snowplow, plowing the snow out of the way. This is what the artillery barrage was kind of doing. So in many cases, when after the battle started, Canadians were in the German trenches before the Germans even knew they were being attacked by the Canadians. So the rolling barrage was a very strategic move by the Canadians. One of the downfalls of the Battle of the Somme was, again, the fact that the Germans had the high ground, so they could see everything that was happening. So if the Canadians just brought all their soldiers to the front trenches in plain sight of the Germans would know there's going to be an attack. So what the Canadians did instead is they took their coal miners, a lot of them from Nova Scotia coal miners divisions. They dug tunnels from behind the Canadian trenches that led up to the Canadian trenches, and the Canadian soldiers stayed in those tunnels until the time of the attack, and they were undercover from the German observers. So the Germans didn't even see the Canadians come to the front lines because they were staying in the tunnels. So when the attack started, the whistles blew and the Canadians poured out of the tunnels, and while the artillery barrage was going on, and the Germans were caught totally by surprise by this tactic. So these things helped the Canadians tremendously. So on the morning of April 9th, 1917, that was Easter morning, the Canadians began the attack on Vimy Ridge, and for the first time in Canadian history, all 4 Canadian divisions fought as one. This is why some people think it kind of united Canada as a country as well. All 4 divisions fought as one and attacked as one. So it was a big moment in Canadian history. By the end of the day, most of Vimy Ridge had been taken. Most of the goals of the battle plan were achieved, and the rest of them were achieved over the next 3 days by April 12th. It was one of the most significant victories for the Allies in World War I, and the Canadians did in 4 days what the British and French couldn't do in 3 months. So this is how effective it was. And the best part, I guess you could call it the best part. Remember back in the Somme, that first morning of running at machine guns over and over, 60,000 casualties, 20,000 killed, 40,000 wounded approximately. These are all approximate numbers. Well, the 4 days of the Battle of Vimy Ridge, planned by the Canadians, meticulously practiced by the Canadians, there were just over around 10,500 casualties, 3,500 killed, 7,000 wounded. That showed how effective the planning was, and that a plan in World War I could be designed that minimized deaths. It's virtually impossible to make a plan in any war where no one's going to die, especially in World War I. But this minimized the casualties. As I said, the Battle of Vimy Ridge served to unite Canada and put us on the world map. We were seen as no longer just a backwater country of a bunch of farmers, fur traders, and lumberjacks. We were seen as legitimate people on the world stage. The other thing that the Battle of Vimy Ridge, I think you should know about, is the fact that after it, the Germans started calling the Canadians stormtroopers. No reference to Star Wars, obviously, because this is 1917. And the Germans began to realize if they were going to be fighting Canadians, they needed more coffins. They knew it was going to be a bloody, bloody battle because the Canadians just did not back down. It wasn't in their nature. Canadians were used to the rugged terrain of Canada, and this country of approximately 6 million people at the time was not going to back down. And as a result, the British military started using Canada kind of as a distraction to the Germans. They would bring the Canadians to a certain point along the front lines, and the Germans think, okay, that's where the battle's going to take place because there's the Canadians, and then the British and French would attack at another point. So they were used as a distraction to the Germans as well, the Canadians were. So this gave Canada a very good reputation. Now, there's a whole bunch of other information that I'm leaving gaps in, and I'm doing that on purpose because I really think you should try to to look at some of this information on your own, discover some of this information. One of a really good book, it's called Vimy, ironically, Vimy. It's by Pierre Burton. Very good, informative book if you're up to reading about history and learning some more. And also there's a good video on YouTube called the Battle of Vimy Ridge. It's 10 parts. It's like 10-minute parts, but it's called the Battle of Vimy Ridge. It's a National Film Board video narrated by Paul Gross. If you're familiar with him, he's an actor. He's in the movie Passchendaele and Men with Brooms. But it's a good video. It gives you lots of information about what happened at Vimy Ridge. So if anything, though, if you learn anything from this, if you don't go on and do some more research on your own, if there's one thing that I hope this lesson gives to you is on November 11th, when we're doing that moment of silence, this gives you something to think about, something to be proud of our Canadians and the things that they did to keep our country free and keep our country safe. This is what Canadian soldiers do every day, even today. They fight and they work hard to keep our country safe. So on November 11th, if anything, remember these men who fought at Vimy Ridge for our freedom, and lest we forget.